All right. Welcome, welcome. This is the Frank Experience, and I'm here with Paul Green. How you doing, Paul?
Fantastic.
So you're a comedian, and you do well. You like a you do acting too, right?
Yes.
Nice. So tell me about that.
Yeah, I've been in LA for 5 years. I've been focusing primarily on stand-up, but I did a bunch of acting when I first moved out here. I mean, as much as I could, I was non-union, so I was just self-submitting and doing all kinds of fun, scrappy, non-union student project type stuff. And then, yeah, then turn my focus more to stand-up. And then this year, I actually have had a couple acting opportunities come my way for some, pilot stuff and um, some feature film type stuff, smaller roles and whatnot, but just taking it as it comes.
Nice, nice. So for those that don't know, with acting, union versus non-union, what is that?
Um, well, there's the acting union, so SAG, Screen Actors Guild. So a lot of projects, I mean, anything that's going to be like on a network or any major motion pictures or anything like that are obviously are only going to be working with union actors. Um, but there's obviously a lot of non-union projects, which are obviously going to be kind of more lower budget type stuff, or
Right.
um, like a lot of reality TV shows, because it's not necessarily professional actors; they're just hiring regular people. Will hire non-union actors. So yeah, for a new actor, there's always this kind of threshold to where you want to get in the union, but once you get in the union, then it cuts you off to a lot of non-union opportunities. And just because you're in the union doesn't mean you're going to be making money. Um, yeah, so, but yeah, once you get to a certain level, you can apply to join the union, and if you get accepted, then you're a member of the Screen Actors Guild labor union.
Nice. And you're saying that makes it a little easier to get like network-based roles?
Oh no, it doesn't make it any easier at all.
Okay.
It's just that you wouldn't be able to work on a network show if you weren't union because they only hire union actors.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. So I was looking up some of the things you were doing, and I saw you did the Pretty Funny Women event. Tell me about that.
Sure. So the Pretty Funny Women it's a comedy class actually, and a
Okay.
show produced by a comic named Lisa Sunset, who started it I think in like 1996 or something. And the
Mm,
catalyst of that was she was out in Hollywood. She was trying to do comedy, and some producer told her that she was too pretty to do comedy. So she said, well, forget that. I'll just do my own show. So she started the Pretty Funny Woman show and would just hire, female comics and um, produce shows. And then with that as a class. So she's been doing that for over 20 years. And a good friend of mine joined her class a couple months ago. And because of the whole pandemic, I had produced a Zoom comedy show, and obviously she had to start doing her comedy shows on Zoom. And so my friend connected me with Lisa just to talk about how to do a good show on Zoom. And she's like, well, can I pay you for that? I was like, no, I don't need money. But I'm like, but if you ever want me to put you on a show, and of course her shows are 99% of the time it's all female lineups and casts and whatever. And I was like, well, I would still love to, to do a show. And so, yeah, so she put me on a show as a special guest. So it was ten female comics and me. So that was last night. It was super fun. It was on Zoom and went really well. It was a great show. Super fun.
nice. Yeah, I saw the photo, and I was like, man, what kind of? I mean, because we're talking about comedy here, and like I grew up listening to a lot of different people. I barely remember because I remember the Seinfeld show. I wasn't like I'm not super old or anything, obviously, but like I do remember watching Seinfeld on the TV, and then I learned that he was a comedian. Personally, for me, I thought his comedy was kind of dry, but
Yeah.
people that I thought were more funnier towards the kind of culture I grew up with, like Bernie Mac, and rest in peace. And I started getting into Kevin Hart. I was watching Dane Cook as well. His humor is super super funny. Just that kind of stuff. And then I learned how, like, when I got into, I didn't know Joe Rogan for the sports commentating stuff. I kind of actually did see a couple of his specials on Netflix, and then I was like, oh, I should definitely check this guy out. And that's why I got into his podcast and stuff like that. Their humor is like the kind of stuff that I kind of grew up with. So where do you get some of your inspirations from as a comic?
Sure. I mean, I just remember I was watching like comedy shows growing up. I remember Louis Anderson used to have a like a stand-up comedy showcase type show, and I just remember watching all those comics and just really being in awe. I remember watching Wendy Lieberman, gosh, maybe 20, 25 years ago. I just remember seeing her, and I didn't really know who she was. I just remember watching a stand-up routine of her and just laughing. It's like, oh, that's the funniest thing. And she actually, there's a joke that she told in that set that I saw on TV, again, decades ago, that I remembered for years. And I would even kind of steal it sometimes, like, not because I didn't start doing stand-up, but just like in regular life.
Right.
Her joke was, I don't remember the exact premise, but it's something like, I was dating this guy, but it didn't work out because I was a morning person and he didn't like me, and that was the joke. And I just remember that joke. So, just in conversation, if I had broken up with a girl or something didn't go well, I'd be like, yeah, it just didn't work out. I'm kind of a morning person and she didn't like me. And so, I mean, I held on to that joke for years. And then actually, maybe, when was this? Last year sometime?
Yeah.
I actually won this comedy contest. And as part of winning, I got to do a show that Wendy Lieberman produced. So I actually got to meet her. And just be like, yeah, I mean, I still remember that joke that you told on television, 25, 30 years ago that, was an inspiration to me and that I just thought was so funny. And then from there, I did love the Seinfeld show. I don't really remember watching a lot of Jerry Seinfeld's actual stand-up. I just knew him from the sitcom.
Right.
But I do remember Brian Regan was a huge influence on me. His first album, I don't remember what his album was called, but it was one where he does all the bits about, yeah, you too, and the yellow one's the sun and all that. And then his DVD, I Walked on the Moon, just blew my mind. I just thought that was the most funny stand-up I'd ever seen. And I've always leaned more towards clean comedy as well. So I really appreciated that his comedy was really clean. I mean, no vulgarity, almost no swearing, and any swearing that he does was very mild. He might say damn or hell, but he wasn't dropping any sort of strong profanity. And just where I was at in my life, that was something that I was really impressed with and that I wanted to emulate. But yeah, I didn't actually really start doing stand-up until just 4 or 5 years ago. I was maybe 34 or 35 years old was the first time that I ever actually tried doing stand-up. I actually got my start as an improv comedian performing with an improv troupe in Arizona known as the Jesters. And they were a short-form improv troupe. And so I got really comfortable being on stage and performing, but it's a very different approach to comedy than stand-up. And I was actually really afraid of stand-up. So I appreciated stand-up. I knew about it, but it wasn't really what I was striving for. And even when I started doing stand-up, it was still just kind of a sidebar I was doing. It wasn't really until the last year or so that I just decided to really get focused on stand-up and just see what would happen if I put all my eggs in that basket for a while and just really honed the craft and took it seriously and started doing open mics all the time and writing and, honing my craft and all that.
Nice. I just shut this door real quick. 1 sec. Totally forget about it, but it definitely makes, because I have my house, when you walk in the front door, there's like a huge vaulted ceiling. Oh, so nice. Anytime you have the bedrooms upstairs with the door open, that just makes for a crappy sound. Sure. But that's super interesting. The one thing that I've always been curious about, because my wife's uncle, he's actually tried. So there's a difference between improv and stand up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Okay, so improv is where you just like make it up.
Yeah, so improv typically, if you've seen like an episode of Whose Line Is It Anyway, that's probably the best example. So it's
Oh
usually,
yeah, I love that show. My wife loves
yeah.
that show.
So
Okay.
yeah, so you have a cast, right? And it's usually starts with an audience suggestion. Now there's different types of improv, um but yeah, you have a cast and you're creating a scene,
Got
spontaneously on the
yeah,
spot
yeah.
is what improvisation. Now it's a little misleading because a lot of stand-up comedy clubs are called the Improv, uh, but stand-up is just one person with a microphone making an audience laugh, and
Right.
there may be improvisation involved. They may go off script. They may riff off an audience member, whatever. But most of what they are sharing is rehearsed, scripted, written material. And again, they can, the really good comedians can adjust that material, as needs be. But again,
Yeah.
it's more of a rehearsed play with the illusion that it's spontaneous, but it's really not. Where improv is
Yeah.
very much spontaneous and off the cuff.
That's interesting because I didn't actually know the differences. But what I found to be super interesting is how there's this British comedian. He's a rap artist, so like he'll rap his comedy. So he'll literally go through. I don't know if you've seen him. He'll go through. I'll have to send you a link. He'll go through like the whole audience and just ask for stuff. And I don't know how in the world he remembers it all, but he'll
Mm.
ask for like 10 things from the audience from different people, and then he'll make a rap about those things, but it's comedic in nature, and it's just mind-boggling how he does it. And he's done it on a news station when they had him on there, and it's just crazy. Like to be able to do that, like that's nuts. So I thought that was sort of like I would say it's a mix of like the stand-up versus improv because he's definitely doing the comedy bit in addition to kind of like a rap kind of deal. So
Well, yeah, I mean that's definitely improvisation. I mean
yeah,
if he's taking suggestions and that's kind of like what Wayne Brady would do on Whose Line Is It Anyway in terms of improvising songs. So that's a very unique skill set, and that's something to where Wayne Brady wouldn't really need a cast, but Wayne Brady could do that same thing, right? Like he could go on stage with, and he probably does. I know that he does performances and stuff. I haven't seen him independent of Whose Line Is It Anyway, but he could totally do that, right? He could go to the audience, get 5 or 6 things, and then just start free flow rapping. So that's definitely an improvisational technique. I do actually something very similar because I'm a music improviser as well, to where I'll bring my keyboard on stage and I'll interview somebody in the audience, and then I'll just improvise a song about them.
oh
And
nice.
yeah, and that's an element of my show that's obviously totally improvised. I don't know what the person's going to say. I don't know what type of song I'm going to play. Um, but that's just one element. If I'm doing an hour set, probably 70-80% of what I'm saying is scripted material. But then, obviously if a crowd member says something, then you got to respond to what they say, and you don't know what they're going to say. And the same thing with like music improv and stuff. So um, yeah, so improvising is definitely an element of stand up. But that's not typically primarily what stand-up comedians are doing. Like if you watch Kevin Hart, or if you watch Dane Cook, or if you watch Brian Regan, or if you watch Anthony Jeselnik, or you watch Sarah Silverman, or you watch Tig Notaro, or you watch Bill Burr, or you watch, any of those comedians who have Netflix specials or whatever, and you're watching an hour of their, comedy, Demetri Martin, Mike Birbiglia, John Mulaney, it's like anywhere from like 90 to 100% of what they're saying has been scripted meticulously and rehearsed. And what the art form really is delivering that material as though it is off the top of the head, but it's not. I mean, I've heard Bill Burr do the exact same set in different venues, different times, where it's, I mean, literally word for word. And you can even see them, like you can see TV sets of him to where like he'll do a bit from maybe a longer act, and it's word for word, and you can see him deliver that same bit on different television shows, and it's almost identical. But when he's delivering it, it doesn't feel like a rehearsed monologue. It feels like
Yeah.
he's just up talking, and that's kind of the genius of the art form. Now there are obviously different performance elements. So like your guy who's improvising raps, that's a performance element. That's an improvisational element. People who do music or write songs or do magic. There's all different types of performance, art forms that will sometimes get roped into stand-up. But to be really like strict on the definition of stand-up, we're talking about somebody who's standing on stage and is telling rehearsed jokes.
Got you.
Now they're also a performer, and yes, they can do crowd work, they can improvise, they can do a song, they can, play piano or whatever. But yeah, if you really want to get strict on what stand-up is, and you even look at like Jerry Seinfeld, when Jerry Seinfeld does stand-up, he's not improvising at all. It's
right.
Those jokes are rehearsed and written and meticulous and listened to and tweaked to really find like the best, most impactful joke, the best way to entertain that audience. You do that over and over and over again. And that's, you get stand-up. But yeah, obviously stand-up isn't the only solo performance art, and a lot of comedians will incorporate different art forms into their stand-up act just to create their performance of their act, for sure.
Got you. So I know that a lot of different comedians, like the way they do their comedy comes from like how they grew up. So like you mentioned, there's a difference between comedians that do vulgar or like swearing type, like that's just what they have. That's just how they do their comedy. So for people that like don't grow up with that, do you think like it's easier to, because you had mentioned that you prefer like not vulgar, no cursing, that kind of stuff. So do you find it difficult to come up with comedy, or is it just come easier to you because you don't prefer to have or to perform comedy with vulgarity or cursing?
Yeah, I mean, it's not a challenge for me.
Okay.
I was just raised very, very religious and stuff, so I
Okay.
didn't really have a I just kind of had that sensitivity already.
Gotcha.
So, but it is typically difficult for comedians to. It's a lot more common for a comedian to want to work dirty, and we call it working blue, right? Vulgarity, talking about sex, being crude, and that sort of stuff. It's a lot harder if comedians gravitate toward that type of material to clean it up than to be a comedian whose material is relatively clean, to maybe loosen up a bit in like front of a bar crowd,
Right.
Which, I'll do that a little bit. I mean, I'm 95% of my material is PG, and maybe 4% of it is PG-13. And, and if I'm in a bar scene or whatever, and if, to relate to that audience, I mean, I can loosen it up a bit, but I don't need to. To me, it's like, if the comedy is funny and it's coming from an emotional point of view, and if an audience wants to connect to you and you're being genuine, like they'll be able to connect to you no matter who they are, what they are, I mean, of course, not all stuff is going to be relatable to all demographics, but
sure. I mean, just hearing talking to you, I know there's definitely like, because there's comedy in different states, in different cities, and people just come from different cultures, I would probably say. And I can see, because I'm interested in like behavioral patterns and cultural upbringings and things like that. I like taking those things into consideration when I'm having discussions with people, because I think a lot of times people forget those things, and they'll, like, obviously in the climate we're in right now, right? Politically speaking and all that kind of stuff. And we don't have to dive into it, but the main focus is there's a lot of people coming from a life where they grew up around a certain way of things that were a certain way. And when they see something different, they're like, no, no, no. And I think that definitely says something about when somebody is developing a comedy, like a set, like you were mentioning, like an hour set. Yeah, I can see how that would come into play. Because I mean, I've even thought of like, oh, should I do comedy? Because like my wife and I are cracking up, and we kind of really enjoy making each other laugh, and I love funny things too. But I know those jokes, because most times they're like inside jokes, and then you try to like do something a little bit different in front of other people. Because I mean, I could play with it. I can you call it crowd work. I could see myself definitely doing that more so, because you're kind of feeding off of the audience a little bit, and then when you start creating a connection, they're there to laugh. They kind of already know that. So there's like a subliminal thing in the back of their head that, like, obviously if it's not funny, they're not going to laugh, but they did go there to laugh. So eventually you're going to start picking up some vibes, and as long as it starts to flow, I've seen comedians like just be able to work off of that and make people laugh.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, there is that element, but there's also another element to where, eventually you're going to need to create, you're going to need to have something to say to them.
Yeah.
And have jokes and have a routine and, and have some worked out material. And there, what's interesting is there are some comedians, and actually this was actually when I started out, I was so much more comfortable doing that. I was so much more comfortable riffing, going out there, oh, you guys married, oh, and just feeding off that, and the crowd loves it, and it's really great. The limit to that is if you actually want to like progress in stand up, you want to get a TV set, you want to get on Conan, you want to be a headliner. Every producer, every booker for any TV show or comedy, well, send me a tape with material. They want to know what your material is, because because the material is what's measurable, right? You can never really know how crowd work is going to go. So they want to know that you have jokes. Like, are your jokes good? Is your routine good? And like every TV booker that I've spoken to, or that, I've tried to submit to, all of them say like, we want 5 minutes, no crowd work, just your jokes, right? Like your jokes need to be able to stand on their own. And that was a challenge for me because, I was a lot more comfortable in the improvisational space because of my background, and I wasn't very confident in my jokes or in my material. So I really had to challenge myself for a couple of years to be like, I'm intentionally not going to do crowd work. Like I want my jokes and my material to be able to stand on their own. So when I stand up, I know that the jokes that I'm saying are funny and that they're going to land, and that I can be successful on jokes alone, because the crowd work and all of that was kind of my crutch, And so, so that's what I worked on. And when you have both elements, I mean, if you're doing a cruise ship or if you're doing a club or whatever, you definitely want both elements. But if you want to like get on TV, or if you want to book a festival or to get the headlining gig, they want to see your material and your jokes. If you happen to be a good improviser or a good crowd work person, that's a bonus, but they're not going to hire you. If you send if I were to send a booker a tape and 10 minutes of me is talking to the person in the front row, you know what I mean? They'll be like, well, I wasn't there. This is funny for the people in the room, but but I don't know if you're going to work for me in my club. I need to know what your material and your jokes are. So, yeah, it definitely is a difference there between material and your ability, just to be funny. And and that's a common thing. Like a lot of people who are funny in their group of friends, they're able to get their friends laughing. They go like, "Oh, I'm the funny guy in the group. I should go try stand up." It's a very, very different art form to be able to be the funny, witty guy with your group of friends when you're having drinks at the bar and your friends get your sense of humor. It's very different than to stand in front of an audience with a microphone and be like, I'm now going to make you guys laugh who are not your friends, who don't know you, who don't know your sense of humor, who you don't have inside jokes with, who you don't have that comfort level with, and start saying things that are going to make this audience laugh, So it's interesting, and that'll happen a lot, like in comedy classes and stuff, somebody will come in to be like, oh, well, yeah, I'm the funny guy, whatever. And they're like, you should try stand up. So here I am. And it's like, good luck, I'm not saying that they can't be successful, but it's very different. It's kind of like, it's like, oh, well, I sound really good singing in the shower. So I figured I'd go become a pop star. It's like, okay. Right. Maybe, but it's not, it's not necessarily as much of a correlation as maybe it's assumed, like, well, my mom thinks I'm talented. It's like, okay, good. Maybe
your mom thinks you're talented regardless. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. It's like maybe your mom's right.
Maybe. Yeah, it's like my wife and I, we like singing around the house, and that's the funniest thing, because every once in a while I was like, man, maybe I should go into this singing thing. Maybe I should try it. And then I would record myself and I'd listen back. I'm like, how in the hell do I
Yeah.
sound way different in the house? And I record myself. I'm like, yeah, that's probably not a good idea.
Yeah.
Because I've
Yeah.
done,
That's the thing
yeah,
is,
the way I can relate is I've done a couple of open mic situations. Before I married my wife, I did an open mic, and I just flat out failed. Oh my goodness.
for
It was
or for
because
music.
so I did acoustic. It
Yeah.
was an acoustic song, and I personally enjoy making up songs on the go. And I think the more you do it, you start to realize, instead of saying random things, you start to learn how to build a chorus and a verse, and maybe a bridge, and just kind of keep going as you try to tell a story. And the story I was telling was, it was like these twins. They didn't know they were siblings. They got separated at birth, and it was a story about how love can extremely change somebody's direction they go in life. And one of the brothers, because they were twins, one of the brothers didn't. He was a foster kid. He hopped all over the place, and just didn't have any love in his life. And the other one had a great family that helped raise him, and then he became a lawyer. The
Mm.
other brother actually got into crime, and long story short, the brother that was actually doing a lot of the wrong choice, or making a lot of wrong choices, ended up in front of his brother as a defendant, and his brother was a prosecutor,
Oh wow. Yeah.
and his brother was the one that put him in jail.
Oh
And then they
wow.
found out later that they were brothers, and it was I thought it was a cool story, but I didn't mess up the lyrics. I messed up my vocals, and I should have warmed up or something. But like, it's stuff like that. Like, when you flat out just fall on your face, you definitely need a couple of those. But I
Right.
still love doing that stuff. I think it's, at least for me, it's fun. I haven't done it in a long time, but um, have you ever like, because I know when you started, you probably like was a little bit rough, but like, have you ever like fallen on your face? Like, and how did you handle that?
Oh sure. Sure. Yeah. Um, I because of my because I started as an improviser, and I mean, as an improviser, I mean, the first show I ever did was so bad, um, and I had like 20 friends in the audience. I was so nervous, and but because I had that background, I had, gosh, probably 1,000 live performances, so I was comfortable as a performer. But again, stand up is a very different beast. It's a very different beast to have a group of improvisers, and we actually are trained to work with each other. So if I say something that doesn't go well, somebody else is going to pick it up and make me look funny, and we're going to work together. But stand up, it's just you and a microphone. If you say something and the audience doesn't laugh, there's nobody there to rescue you. And there's a different expectation, because the audience expects you to have a prepared, funny thing to say, whereas in improv, they know you're making it up off the spot. So it's a very different element,
Yeah,
and
definite expectation.
yeah, and usually when you're doing stand up for the first time, you're doing that at an open mic, and nobody knows you, so they're going to put you. The first time I did stand up was I did an open mic at this club in Scottsdale, which I don't even think is around anymore. And I showed up super early because I wanted to go up right up front so I wouldn't be anxious or whatever. So I got up, I put my name on the sign up list. I was there like an hour early, and I talked to guys. I'm like, yes, I'm here, for your open mic. They put me on the list. They bumped me for 3 hours. So I was there first, and they just kept pushing me down the list, pushing me down the list, pushing me down the list, because they just didn't care about me,
Oh,
Plus,
wow.
the club was a joke anyway. And anyway, but so by the time I went up, like, the only people left in the audience were a couple of other comics who couldn't care less about me. I had a couple friends who actually stayed that whole time. But it was the first time I'd ever tried to tell jokes, and some went okay, some didn't. I was so nervous, but it was not a good experience, and I didn't do stand up again for probably another year or so after that, because it was so traumatizing for me, and
Yeah.
and again, I didn't really know that that's what I wanted to do. I was just kind of trying it out.
Right.
And but then I ended up taking a class, a stand-up comedy class in Tempe, Arizona, and that was very helpful because now you're in a nurturing environment. I had a good teacher, and he actually taught you how to write jokes, and he taught you how to, because it is an art form. There's kind of this idea that like, oh, comedian is because you're just a funny person. So if you're just a funny person, you just get up on stage and do that. But comedy is an art form. It's like painting. It's not like, oh, well, you have an artistic mind. Why don't you go paint the Mona Lisa? It's like, no, like it's a craft, right? There's so much involved in, being an architect or a
Right.
sculptor or a painter or a musician. Same with piano. It's like, yeah, you may be able to listen to music and really feel music or whatever, but that doesn't mean you're going to be able to sit down on a piano and play. It's like you got to practice, scales and get the dexterity and learn music and learn, emotion and learn tonality and learn, there's so much that goes into it. And it's the same thing with stand-up comedy. It's an art form. There's just so much that goes into somebody like, Bill Burr, who can stand on a stage and just put an audience in stitches for an hour. That didn't happen just because Bill Burr was kind of a person at the bar, that happened because, Bill Burr like has put his 10,000 hours in, open mics and shows and bombing and rehearsing and trying again. And same thing with Seinfeld, Seinfeld just didn't show up one day. It's like, no, Seinfeld wrote, it was ridiculous. I think he wrote every day for like 5 hours or 3 hours or something like that. Some ridiculous amount. Man, he would just write jokes. And then every single night he'd go to the comedy club and he'd try out those jokes. He'd record a set. He'd go home, listen what worked, didn't, rewrite, do it again, go back. Like nobody just happens to become an incredibly successful stand-up comedian. There's, and it's like anything, everybody wants the quick formula to success. It's like, no, nobody just rolled out of bed and was like, oh, I'm this funny guy. I'm this funny woman. I'm just going to go on stage now. Oh, look how good I am at stand-up comedy. It's like, no, like anybody who we know or, has any sort of success in stand-up comedy, what you're not seeing is the iceberg. You're not seeing the 90% of that iceberg that's underneath water, which was open mics, shitty shows, bar shows, writing, rewriting, rehearsing, honing craft, taking classes, getting feedback, failing, doing it again. And then, you do that for 5 years, you do that for 10 years, you do that for 20 years. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, that guy's so funny. It's like, yeah, they are now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, yeah. Like I really enjoy Bill Burr. Like he's like, so the kind of comedy I'm into is because I grew up different. Like I grew up with everybody cussing and screaming and yelling and all that kind of stuff. So I kind of grew up with that. But Bill Burr, like his comedy is like he'll tell you how it is, but then he'll also sort of just make it funny too. And so I don't know. I really appreciate his comedy, but I also love his roles that he does. The recent movie, I think it was Staten Island that he was in. That was a really good movie. It was funny, but it was just good. So it's kind of interesting to see how people that do stand-up comedy, or for example, like The Rock, he did wrestling and then he got into, acting. Like since you're kind of in that area, like how does that work when somebody goes from one sort of industry like comedy right into like acting? Is it like a seamless thing? Is it like you got because obviously they're both art forms and crafts and stuff like that, but like how does that work?
I wish I know. I'll tell you when it happens to me.
So like so I remember you were the extra in The Last Ship. How'd that go?
Yeah. Well, being an extra requires no art form whatsoever. So in LA there's a company called Central Casting, and the whole job of this company is to feature all of those extras. So you're not being hired because of a talent. You're just being hired because you happen to be on a list and you happen to look like what they need. So all I did was that, I just went to the Central Casting, and you have to go there like at 4 a.m. because they only accept like the first 80 people in line. But for a lot of people, it's kind of their first step in Hollywood is to try to get one of these extra jobs. And the hope is that when you're on set, and you're this extra that maybe somebody will notice you, or maybe like you have a certain look or whatever, and then you'll maybe get bumped up to where you need to deliver a line, and now you're a featured extra or whatever. And then, that can be one way to start to grow your career. For someone like Bill Burr, it's just, he was just such a brilliant comedian for years that, when you're in the comedy scene, you're going to meet, there's so many industries that are adjacent to that. You're going to meet sitcom producers, you're going to meet, casting directors, and you're going to meet, television and movie producers, and you're going to meet, other comedians, who are also, who are writers and stuff. And especially when you start getting TV spots, because, now people know what you look like on television, and they'll be like, oh, Bill Burr, he has that certain look. Oh, he kind of has that sort of like Boston anger, frustrating character. Oh, he's also a brilliant writer. So, he wrote, he was on the Dave Chappelle sketch show, so, so Dave Chappelle was doing comedy. Bill Burr was doing, I mean, I'm speculating. I don't actually know how the connection happened. So this is theoretically probably what happened is Dave Chappelle met Bill Burr out in the comedy world. Dave Chappelle was doing comedy, and then, somehow Mel Brooks found about him and put him in Men in Tights, Robin Hood Men in Tights. And now he's a movie actor. And then, and now he can get meetings with Sony, and he can get meetings with, different big production things. So then he's like, oh, well, I want to do a sketch comedy show. It's like, oh, cool. Well, we've now seen your stand up on television. We've seen you on Robin Hood Men in Tights. Yeah, we'll let you pitch a pilot. So he pitches a pilot, and then he gets to assemble his team. And who's he going to put on his team? All of the comedians who he knows, who are good friends of his and who he knows are funny. And he brings on Bill Burr, and he brought on Neil Brennan, and boom, 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 boom. And then, the show's a success. And now, so, it's that sort of, when you're out doing it, you're going to meet people, you're going to network, people are hustling, and they're moving and shaking, as it were. And when somebody gets a big opportunity, who are they going to work with? They're going to work with the people they know, and their friends who they know are funny, and who they can trust, and who they know are going to be reliable and going to show up, and it's no different with anything else in life. It's like, when you're looking for any sort of, professional, whatever, who you're going to do first, you're going to ask your friends, hey, I need a realtor, who do you know? Oh, well, my realtor was great. He's a good friend of mine.
Yeah.
Boom, yeah. And it's no different in the, in the industry. So, I mean, and like anything else, all you can do is just focus on what you can focus on, which is like, I'm going to focus on performing as much as I can. I'm going to focus on honing my craft. I'm going to make sure that anytime I show up and I do stand up on stage, that I'm so funny, that I'm undeniable, and everybody in the audience is, go, oh, yeah, that guy's really funny, and from there, then people want to put you on their shows, and then you start booking shows. You show up, you deliver again, you show you're professional, you show you take it seriously, and then, things start to snowball. And it's like, I mean, everything that's happened like this year has all just been for me, just taking opportunities that I could, submitting to festivals, doing the best I can to hone my craft, try to be as funny as I can, show up with a good energy, deliver, and make sure that everybody that I interact with, knows that I'm serious, and that I'm funny, I'm reliable, and, that I'm easy to work with. I don't have a bad attitude, and, like all that stuff.
Right.
And, sooner or later, hopefully, is, an opportunity will come, like with Seinfeld. He did the Tonight Show in, what was it, like early 1980, I think it was, or maybe late 70s. But he'd been doing stand-up for years. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody cared, and then he did the Tonight Show. And then some producer at NBC goes, oh, I could probably do a show with that guy. He's funny. Reaches out to him. It was 10 years later before Seinfeld. You know what I mean? Like, it took 10 years from Jerry Seinfeld's first Tonight Show appearance before the Seinfeld Chronicles came out, And what did Jerry Seinfeld do? He's like, well, I probably should use a writing partner. Oh, I like Larry David. Larry David's weird and interesting and creative and brilliant.
He's that guy with that weird hair?
Yeah, Larry David, he does the oh gosh, what's his show on now? Yeah, Larry David was the, the chief writer, the writer and producer on Seinfeld. It's actually who George Costanza is actually based off of Larry David. So George Costanza was kind of Larry David's character.
Gotcha.
But Larry David was who Seinfeld knew, and Larry David had done
Right.
some writing on SNL and whatnot, but like nobody knew who he was. Nobody cared who he was, and he's just a writer and a comedian just trying to make it in New York. And then Seinfeld goes, "Hey, we need to write this show." And they're like, "Okay, let's write a show." And they go to a coffee shop and they start hacking it out. And, 10 years later, Seinfeld comes out. Seinfeld almost got canceled like 3 or 4 times within the first couple of seasons. It wasn't a hit right off the bat. And they just, like it was this close to like nobody caring about what Seinfeld was. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and nobody knowing who he is and nobody caring about who he is, and same with Larry David.
Right.
But they just kept hacking along and just honing their craft and working on it and holding to their guns and doing what they felt was funny. And then, by season 3, the kind of gears clicked in, and then all of a sudden, I think the highest grossing sitcom of all time, or close or something. I mean, it's up there.
That's
Um,
interesting.
But, all of that just started with just Seinfeld just writing comedy every day, and then just doing stand up every night and just honing his craft. And then because of that, he met somebody in New York who was a producer for The Tonight Show and said, "Hey, I think you're ready. Let's put you on The Tonight Show." And they got put on The Tonight Show, and then a producer saw him. But then it was 10 years later. And you got to think like, what was happening during that 10 years? He still had to live. He still had to eat. He still had to pay rent. He still had to work. He still had to, hone his craft and work on it. Like,
Yeah.
nobody just hands you $100 million. He got that 30 years later. So
Yeah.
good for
30
him.
years worth of work, That's crazy.
Yeah.
So you're
And now,
talking about
yeah.
festivals and stuff like that. And so like how has COVID impacted like what you do and like so like and what are you kind of doing like right now? I think you're talking about doing Zoom shows. And so how has like did you like just go into like I'm just gonna figure it out mode immediately when they started shutting things down? Or did it like take you a little bit of time to kind of like figure it out?
Yeah, I mean, when it first happened, of course, everybody was, not everybody, but I think most people were, just kind of in a state of what the heck is going on. I mean, we've never experienced anything like this. And I just kind of withdrew, because just show after show after show just started getting canceled. And then, I had a tour that was canceled, and I had a bunch of, like, this is actually going to be probably my biggest year because I just did a ton of work last year and it was just starting to pay off. I was getting, headlining gigs all around the country and tours and casino gigs and, booking festivals and and then it just all dried up within about 2 weeks. It was just cancel after cancel after cancel. And then there were a couple things that were still holding on, like I was supposed to have a casino tour actually that I should be on right now that I did last year that was super fun. And it's like 8 casinos up in the Northwest. And I still had that booked. And the booker was like, we're still holding on. We're still holding on. Hadn't canceled it. And then like maybe late July or something, she's like, sorry guys, like, it's because it's Seattle and Oregon and
Yeah.
everything's still closed. And they're like, and the restaurants just can't afford to pay comedians to come out. Everybody's just barely hanging on. So, yeah. So, we're all just adjusting and, some people are doing Zoom shows. I haven't really proactively, pursued it. Mostly what I did is I just took this as a time to just kind of get my personal life in gear. And I'm working right now. I'm gainfully employed and just really working on getting my financial situation squared away and working on myself spiritually and working on myself emotionally and physically. And I'm just like, well, I'm going to focus on what I can. And, I mean, it's not going to stay like this forever. I mean, just, hey, everybody, don't ever leave again and don't ever do anything again. It's just not a sustainable strategy. It's like, I'm sorry, like, and the virus is not going away. It's going to be here forever. Like the coronavirus is not going to die. Like chickenpox is still around and measles is still around, like, so there's going to come a point to where it's like, all right, I don't even want to predict what's going to happen, but but the reality is you can't keep human beings inside for the rest of their lives. There's going to come a time where it's like,
on that topic though, do you think since we covered all the comedy stuff, I like to just kind of chit chat with people about what's going on. And so like obviously I mentioned I watched Joe Rogan and he moved from LA to Austin. And there's actually a lot of people that I follow on YouTube that are like real estate agents, and they do YouTube as well, but that's their primary thing now. And real estate is more of like something they do in addition to. But anyways, the point is, like, two of those type of individuals have already decided to move out of California along with Joe and a lot of other people. So have you seen that a lot? I mean, what's been your perspective on that?
Yeah, there's a lot of people leaving. Like LA is just blasted expensive, and it's not being managed well. And, so, yeah, I mean, I've seen that as well. And California has been so strict, and I mean, I get both sides of the argument. Everybody just saying like, well, if you open up, you're heartless and you just don't care about killing old people or whatever. And it's like, fair enough. It's like, this virus has taken a lot of life. I don't want to diminish people who have experienced loss. And I totally understand that. Right. But I also totally understand, it's like, this is a free country, and, it is not actually the government's right to say you're not allowed to leave your home. You're not allowed to run your business. You're not allowed to use your private property for your own personal use. And businesses are private property. When it just turns into this, sorry, there's a risk, and we are not going to allow you to take that risk because it might harm somebody else. It's like, that's the conundrum of freedom. Or as they say in Hamilton, what is it? I love that line. When Aaron Burr's like, Hamilton's trying to convince Aaron Burr to help him defend the Constitution, and he goes, "It's full of contradictions." And Hamilton says, "So is independence." And it's like, that's the contradiction of independence. Like, if you're going to be free and a free individual, there are risks associated with that, and there are risks associated with the other people who you may or may not interact with. It's like driving a car. It's like every time I drive a car, I'm assuming the risk that somebody else may not behave responsibility and could kill me. Right. And I also assume the risk that am I the only one who's ever checked a text message while driving a car? I assume I'm not the only one, right? Every time I check that text message, I'm just everybody on the road at risk. I might kill somebody, So how do you avoid that? A, it's illegal to drive cars, and nobody can drive a car. Or B, okay, well, we're going to make it legal. We're going to put some laws in place. And, if you're distracting, you're driving, and somebody suffers life, you're going to go to jail. And it's like, so anyway, I just kind of take that approach. It's like, yes, okay, there's a virus out there. Yes, if you stay inside and you never interact with anybody, you're not going to catch the virus. If you go out, you run the risk of catching it from somebody else, and you also run the risk that you might be a carrier, and everybody you interact with, you might infect. And it's like, fair enough. So my thought is, if your comfort level is, I don't want to get the virus, then you should have the freedom to stay inside and not go outside. What I don't feel the government has the right to do is to say, well, because you might infect somebody else, even if you're not infected, we're just going to make everybody stay at home. And business owners are not allowed to use their private property to conduct business, or what's that called in the Constitution? A right to peacefully assemble. Yeah. Well, because if you run a business, then somebody might come in and might get infected. It's like, yeah, that is true. That might happen. Well, those people might die. Yeah, that's true. Right. They might, and that would be really horrible. I'm not advocating that. I don't want that to happen. But at the same time, it is actually not the government's right to take away personal freedom from everybody to potentially maybe, protect a few people. And so anyway, that's kind of.
No, I mean, I definitely get where you're coming from. And I agree. It's funny because I was thinking about the car thing too. Like, literally people drive every day and risk when you drive because there's so many things that could go wrong. I mean, when I had a moped to go back and forth to college when I was living in Chandler, and I kind of moved between Chandler and Gilbert area, I knew riding that thing, I was going to take a risk. Sooner or later, somebody was going to, bump me or hit me. And, it's either going to be I didn't generally take highways much at all because the thing could barely go 55 miles an hour. So if I did, it was like going from, because the beautiful thing about Arizona highways is that they're just built in such a way that you could literally get on and stay on the right lane and just get right back off. And so that's pretty much the only time I would do it. But the one I had gotten hit, because I get, like, when you drive a two-wheeled vehicle, you just have to assume that people are just going to always cut you off. They're always going to be in your way, and you just have to assume that. So you have to be aware. And so I was, and I just didn't think it was going to happen when everybody's coming to a stop at a red light. And I was slowing down. I was like 35, and I was getting slower and slower. And this lady came with the I think it was like a Jeep or something, SUV type of Jeep, and she just started coming into my lane. And all I did was knock, knock, knock. It freaked her out, and she started going like this, and she slammed into me, and I had to kick off, and that's when I tumbled. But I mean, I take that risk, and I knew that was a risk, but I still wanted to do it. I still wanted that type of, it was a very affordable way of transportation. It was cheap to fill up, cheap to insure. But I mean, again, it was a risk. I paid the price, but I also paid for safety equipment too. So I took necessary precautions. But like with what's going on right now, I feel like that's really all we need to do. We just need to take the necessary precautions. But the reality is, what precaution do you have if a meteor decides to come and hit you when you're walking out your house in the morning? Like, nobody can protect against that.
Right.
You know? So I mean, I see what you're saying, and I believe that, like, you know, we should have the freedom to leave our house, but then people shouldn't have the ability to get mad just because we're out there doing as we please. In addition to, the government shouldn't be able to tell us that we can't assemble. The thing that I don't understand, though, is, like, with all of the voting and with all the voting and things like that, it's like, so when they were saying nobody can vote inside, because I know that's different in every state, but like they were saying you can't go to vote in a booth with other people around because it's too much. Well, then why are you letting people go to the grocery store? I mean, if we're going to really get down to brass tacks here, you're basically saying that people can risk their lives to get food, because there's obviously no other way unless you're going to start hunting again. But like, that's my logic when I think about it. It's like, you're letting all this stuff happen, which is a contradiction to how you're saying we can't do these other things. That's how I feel like you're being controlling, because this is okay, but this is not. But the same risk is over here at the grocery store, the post office, or whatever. But yet we can't do these other things. That's how I look at that. And that's how I see that whatever the government's trying to do, that's an overreach. Like in California, really trying to make you put your mask on in between bites? Really?
Yeah. The double standard is just unbelievable. I mean, right when this happened, there were some comedy clubs that are really small, like 15-person capacity max, and they're mostly just for open mics. And there are some comedians who are like, no, I'm gonna keep doing it. I'm gonna do open mics. Like, no, you don't get to tell me to stay at home. And they were getting blacklisted. Comedians were like finding out who these were, and they were like blasting them to try to tell the government on it, because them doing that was them, you know, they were pretty much just being compared to murderers. Like, you doing that, you're only doing that because you don't care about killing old people, and you're insensitive, and you're a horrible human being. So we need to, you know, shame you and publicly blast you and try to blacklist you and MacArthur scare. That same week, I went to Home Depot, and there's a line out the door to Home Depot. Hundreds and hundreds of people just filing in Home Depot. And I'm going to tell me, like, you're going to tell me that these people who are going to go in, they're going to touch all these products. They're going to touch a product and look at it and put it back and touch it and look at it. And yeah, they're standing 6 feet apart. And yeah, Home Depot had counters and they were limiting how many people could be in there. But I mean, they were still filing through, I mean, thousands of people in a day. You're going to tell me that that is okay, that Home Depot can do that. but 10 comics sitting 6 feet away, you know, in a you know, is, we're the insensitive ones, you know. And the same thing with the grocery stores, and the fact that, like, restaurants, you know, like, restaurants can have seating outside, you can't do stand-up outside. The Comedy Store actually got approval from West Hollywood to start doing their shows again outside.
Yeah.
They sold out all of their seats in like a day, and then the county came in and said, nope, that's entertainment, can't do it, shut them down. They had to refund all of this money. So it's like, oh, gotcha. So a bunch of people eating outside, the virus is contained, but somebody says a joke in a microphone and people laugh. Oh no, now we're, you know. So, and that's just where I get like the government overreach, yeah, definitely. And I
Yeah,
understand.
I mean,
I understand taking care of people. I understand we should love people. I understand. I don't want your grandmother to die either. And I don't want, I haven't had anybody, I've had people close to me get the virus and recover, no problem. I've had 2 degrees of separation. I know of people who've passed away who were healthy and young and stuff. And I'm like, so I don't want to diminish. I'm not out there saying, no, the virus doesn't exist. It's all a government hoax, or, I'm like, no, it's out there, and it's definitely, it's a virus, and it seems to be a little bit more aggressive than the flu. And I'm not saying, let's go sneeze on people purposefully, but at the same time, it's like, cool. What's the risk? And then as a human being, as a sovereign individual who lives in what was supposed to be a free country, I get to assume the risk for my property, for my body, for my family, and I get to make those decisions, and everybody else makes their own decision. And if I choose to go out and somebody else has the virus and they're careless and they come out and they get me sick and I die, that's horrible. That's tragic.
Right.
But that's the risk that I took. Just like I could also go out tomorrow and get on a 3-pile car wreck on the freeway and die.
Yeah,
and that
car pile up. Yeah.
Be very tragic, and it would be very sad. But the result of that is not, okay, nobody can drive cars on the freeway anymore, ever. Because,
Yeah, no, I mean, so there's that. There's that, but then there's also other statistics for other things too. Like when Corona started being a big issue in April, May, June, like I started thinking, and other people were mentioning this too, those that actually were like really thinking out loud on a TV set, and they're like, why are we like really focusing on this thing like it's a pandemic in regards to technology that we had 100 years ago? Like the Spanish flu, like that was, I think that's what it was. Correct me if I'm wrong, but there was a flu that we had, it was over 100 years ago, and it was the same situation. Everybody was wearing masks, but what we had then versus now is totally different in terms of medicine, right? But also, like, there's so many deaths every year just because of just regularly getting sick. Like different people have different immune systems, different genetics, a lot of different things. And so that's kind of where you're like, well, why are we like, no? So apparently 200,000 people died, right? But that number is similar to a lot of the other sicknesses and illnesses that happen every single year, regardless of what's going on. But we want to make it a political thing, and it's a big deal when actions that are taken that save millions of lives. And I'm not trying to get into the left or right portion of a conversation. I'm just trying to make a point to say, if there is inaction, people are going to die. If there's action, people are still going to die, but not as much as inaction. So there's a million other things people can do, or politicians can do. The president that, he can do. But like, I just look at that and I think to myself, like, if there's something being done, that's great. If there's something not being done, then that's not great. But when it comes to everything else that we've already experienced, why are we making a big deal about this? I don't know. I disagree with it. I think we should have handled it differently and not made it seem, I'm not saying that it's not a serious thing. We obviously didn't know a lot about it. There's a lot of things changing. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask. It's airborne, it's not airborne. It's a big deal, it's not a big deal. And I get it. Like, people were learning, and I understand that. But when it's like, well, we know people are getting sick. We know this could be an issue. I don't know. And then I think there was a team that was, their whole purpose was to deal with like just not diseases. It's like a disease control team in the White House, and President Trump actually removed the team right before the pandemic. I thought that was pretty funny. Like, I don't know if that works, but anyways, yeah, I disagree with that. I think something different could have been done. I don't know what, but I disagree with the numbers and how they're making a big deal out of something that people get sick for every year, and it's like they're not making an issue about that.
Yeah, 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 and again, I mean, you can't even say that without people like, hey, my grandmother died, and this is just like, yeah, that's horrible. Like, I'm really sorry to hear that. You know what I mean? Like, I am not delighting in the death of these people, and I'm not, like, and it's the same thing with cancer. Like,
right.
Millions of people die of cancer. Millions of people die of diabetes. Millions of people die of heart disease. Millions of people die
Right.
in car wrecks. Millions of people, die from starvation. I mean, there's so much, going on, but this idea that, well, we're going to punish the entire nation and we're going to limit constitutionally guaranteed freedoms to individuals without any resistance. If you resist, you go to jail. And if you even speak out, it's because you're a horrible grandmother killing, insensitive, horrible human being, where it's like, well, what about all of these business, owners whose lives have been destroyed? What about, mental health issue, which have gone up, suicide has gone up, abuse has gone up, I try to avoid numbers because I just never know where numbers come from. And it's usually a number that supports your bias that was created by somebody who also supports your bias. But, I would be interested to know how many lives have been destroyed and ruined and how many deaths there have been because of the lockdown, because of poverty, because of starvation, because of suicide, because of mental health. So like, just saying, well, if you're not willing to just accept this government dictation and complete removal of your freedoms, it's like, hey, you can't go to church anymore. Okay. Oh, no, you can't have people over at your private property anymore. Government owns that. Government owns your church. Government owns your business. The government has more control over your private property, your religious faith, your friendship, your interactions, your job, your private business, your own freedoms, your own thoughts, what you can say, than you do of yourself. I'm just like, that to me, we're getting into some very sketchy territory, which is far more damaging than the virus. And yes, I fully acknowledge that people's lives have been affected by the virus negatively, and I am not diminishing that.
Right.
I'm not saying that that's okay, and I'm sorry, and my heart goes out to you, and it really does.
Yeah.
And it's horrible, but it doesn't make me feel that this course of action is at all appropriate or at all effective. Even it's like the people
right. Well, I mean, it's like, so there was a parent, and the thing that kind of goes into like the government overreach, there was so to the extent of somebody's power and water was shut off. They were having a party, that story, and I'm like, that is scary. But I think if we dive into that further down the road, it's like, okay, so COVID's done. We put in precautions like smallpox, like all these things that we know how to take care of when we're kids, and we know how to get immune to when we're kids, whether through vaccines or whatever. I know people have their opinions on vaccines, but like for example, and it's hard though too, because people don't, and I think that's what's coming up now. You have the age of the internet, so now people think they can Google everything, and when one person says one thing and it's hard to verify it, even if they do have credentials, it's like, well, there's just one thing in vaccines that may or may not work, but the reality is there's a percentage thing about that, and that I do understand is like, okay, so if it is doing or helping 95% of people, or 90%, whatever the number is, I don't know what it is, but I'm just making an example. And so you have 100,000 people, and 90 to 95,000 people are alive, and the other people, like, it's hard to play numbers, and you mentioned that earlier, but the reality is when you're thinking of a country of 300 plus million people, like, you don't want millions to die, you don't want anybody to die, but then again, you have to do something. And I don't know, I feel like when we get to the point where we do have these vaccines for COVID and whatever else comes in the future, I'm afraid that these government entities are going to continue to try to overreach and take more power and do more. And like, I keep telling people, I'm like, and with all clarity, like, I don't, you probably noticed this on social media, but I'm definitely a Second Amendment advocate. And I think, and when I had mentioned a comment on somebody's post, I was like, the one thing that I'm fearful of is these governments, because this already actually happened in Michigan, where governments overreach to the point to where they went and tried to take the guns. And I don't know the particulars of the story. I'm just going based off of like what I recall. These people had, or they were trying to take away their rifles, because there's this like political debate about rifles or no rifles or AR-15s or whatever, blah blah. They were trying to come and take their guns, and it was unlawful, and they fought back, and people were trying to condemn. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, have we lost the idea of what the Constitution is and the right to bear arms? And so when I enlisted in the U.S. Army, even though it was a short stint, like I took an oath, and that oath was to protect against enemies, foreign and domestic. So that also means that if people here are trying to do things that are unlawful, and like whether it be take my land, because there's another story of somebody's land. They were like the city or the sheriffs or whatever. They were literally trying to take their land, and they were on a standoff, and it was deemed legal from the I believe the Supreme Court. I'll have to look that up, but that's where that's just what I recall. But that's the kind of thing, and the comment that I had made on this person's post, which a lot of people, it was more like everybody was pointing, mocking at me. Like I was stating, like the thing that makes America not safe anymore to live in as a country is when you have this overreach of government, and you have these things happen where they're like literally trying to do whatever they want. For example, you have politicians wanting to defund the police, but they're being protected by the police.
Right.
Like that stuff makes no sense. I know everybody's on different points of the aisle, but the main point is, if it comes down to your safety and your protection of your family, and you want to be able to do that, but then they take that away and you can't do that anymore. But what if they decide to make their own rules and laws, and you can be damaged in some sort of way, you're not safe or whatever the case, and you can't protect your family? That's what I was kind of saying I disagree with. I think when government gets to the point to where you're not able to live like we're supposed to freely, that's where the major problem is.
Yeah, and and we're seeing that battle. I mean, there is a push for communist and socialist ideals, and people go, no, that's the right way to do it. It's, when you point to historical examples of how that has failed, they go like, oh, well, that wasn't the socialism we're talking about, and it's like, it's the same principles, when you try to take away individual freedom and individual responsibility, because that's all it is. Individual freedom, individual responsibility. And when it turns into government control, government responsibility, meaning I'm not responsible for my own actions and my own behavior or my own income and my own safety of my family. The government is responsible for my income, for my safety, for my family, for my decisions. I don't have to do anything. The government is going to just provide me my house, provide me my living, provide me my income. Any work that I do, the government's going to take all the money and then distribute it how it thinks is best.
Right.
We're getting into very, very dicey territory. And the thing about power is, once nobody ever gives power back. It's the boiling
right.
frog. It's the boiling frog. You don't throw the frog in boiling water. You put it in cold water, and then you just turn the heat up 1 degree at a time. And it's like, and we're totally experiencing that. And nobody wants to recognize it, because nobody wants to go like, oh no, the government would never do anything evil. Yeah. Oh no, and like, and it's really easy, to guise it under compassion. Oh no, we just need to be more compassionate for people who are struggling. So, and we just need to protect people from guns. So let's just take guns away from everybody. It's like, no, you're not taking the guns away from everybody.
Yeah.
You're giving all of the guns to one. You're giving them to somebody's going to have guns. So the question is, who do you want to have them? Do you want the government and criminals? Because criminals aren't going to follow the law.
Right.
So those will be the only two entities left. So you're going to give all your guns to Donald Trump and to criminals.
Right.
And no responsible individuals will have them. And then we can leave it up to the criminals and the government to decide when guns are an appropriate force, And and politically, I don't get right, left. I mean, I have a tendency to sound more right, but I don't actually agree with that. I'm just very libertarian, and I just go, the whole point of this country was sovereign freedom individual. Every individual has inalienable rights given to him by God. I'm a lot more into the Declaration of Independence actually than, the Constitution is kind of incidental to me, but it's, the Bill of Rights and the Declaration of Independence, like those principles. It's like, these are the freedoms that God gave you. You get to exercise those freedoms however you think is in your best interest, the best interest of your family, the best interest of your community, and the best interest of your country. And those rights are given to you by God. The government doesn't have the right to give them to you, and the government doesn't have the right to take them away. You have a right to worship God. You have a right to say what you want to say. You have a right to have a gun to protect yourself. You have a right to hang out with who you want to hang out with. You have a right to run a business. You have a right to a trial. You have a right to be considered innocent before proven. It's like these very basic rights, and every single one of them, it just the boiling water is just being.
Yeah.
Well, when we said right to have a gun, surely the founding fathers couldn't have anticipated assault rifles.
AR-15s.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. You're right. They couldn't have anticipated that. But the principle is still the same, which is the individual needs to have the power. Well, we're just going to give individuals Apache helicopters? It's like you're missing the point. The point is individual freedom, individual responsibility. You are responsible for your own actions. No one else is going to change your diapers. The government is not our parents. The government is not our mom and our dad. It's not their job to feed us and clothe us and to take care of us and to give us a house and to give us money when we run out of money and to pay for our college and to pay for our, and to make us happy. And if we're sad, then the government has to come in and give us a hug and that's just not the government's job. And, and I totally get the frustration with wage disparagement, and I get the frustration with, with filthy rich billionaires and stuff. And I'm like, yeah, well, the only reason they're that rich is because the government let them, the government that we gave power to. And the more power we give the government, the more power they give the big businesses, and the wage disparity, all of that continues. If the government actually did its job, which was just stay out of things, you know what I mean? Like, then those businesses would never be able to get as big as they were, But anyway, I know I'm just a crazy libertarian speaking crazy talk. Freedom and personal responsibility. What? You just don't care. You are a heartless person. So fair enough. Yeah, I am.
Yeah. So I definitely think that when it comes to a lot of the things you see in America now, I think the one thing that I see that's super important when it comes to people having conversations or arguments or things that have to do with discussing different perspectives or beliefs. I was talking to people last night. My wife and I went to a friend's party, and we were discussing like it's important, like, because they all believe something completely different. Like they want to vote this way, I'm voting that way, and like I don't care. It was just like I wanted to bring up things that I felt were certain reasons why I didn't want to vote for somebody, this way, and this is why I'm voting this way. And without getting into the tits for tat, one thing I was trying to help everybody get on the same page of is like, before we get into things like, because what happens with those arguments is like people bring a lot of stuff up that, number one, you may or may not have read into or you don't know about. And so that creates like a conversation that's not on a level playing field. Like nobody can, like unless we're going to pull up laptops and we're all going to like, get our articles and everything, all that kind of stuff. But if we can get on the same foundation of, okay, so let's get to a point where we can both have some sort of a argument that we can come out of and we both learn something, and that's kind of like where I believe this podcast is kind of built from. Like I enjoy having good conversations with people, like learning about, stand-up comedy and all those things about the industry. I didn't know that. I had talking with my friend I've known for almost a decade. I learned why certain songs actually have crappy lyrics, in my opinion, but that they repeat themselves. There's actually a reason why it's written certain ways, because it's not meant to be a song of a story. It's meant to be like just a pop song, or it's meant to be just a club song or whatever. And so I didn't know that. Like but you know, having these kind of conversations, you learn something new. And I was also talking with somebody who's from Germany, who's originally from Bulgaria, and then he helped me learn a little bit more of why the military presence in other countries from America's, like American military bases, aren't good. He was like, they need to pack up and go. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Let's dive into that. And he was saying one of the reasons is because America is so big to the point to where when they want to take or give a country freedom or democracy or whatever is the way he was putting it, they will come in. But the problem that happened in his particular scenario was he almost died. There was a bug in a software for one of the drones that were shooting a missile, and they shot it in the wrong direction, and it landed 20 miles out of his town. So, like, and so from his perspective, I was like, wow, I've actually never heard anybody tell me that. That helps me feel like as an American, I want to learn more about those things. I'm not saying I could do anything about it, but if I got into a capacity later on in life where I had some freedom of time, and I could actually try to look into those issues, like one of the biggest things that I care about, at least right now, is you ever been to Dallas?
Yeah.
So Dallas, there's this place called the Dallas Makerspace, and you can make crafts there. You can so like a lot of clothing, cosplay type of stuff. There's a lot of areas where you can do art, electronics, engineering. There's a whole room full of soldering equipment and just all that kind of stuff for electronics. And then they have like woodworking, metalworking, just like literally everything. Even an area for chemistry with a fume hood, the whole 9 yards. So they have a lot of stuff, even 3D printing, the works. But it was built over time. That model, I think that would be a beautiful model. And in that case, that area could also, they have like a production studio for like green screens, cameras, all that stuff. And it would be kind of cool to have, like you were mentioning, a comedy class. Like that would be cool if they had that too, because people can actually create a class and they can host classes there too. That model, that would be a great model to have in other cities. If I got the opportunity to build a nonprofit, that's what I would want to do. I'd want to take that model, document it, and bring it to other cities and have businesses contribute their, money they got to pay for. I got to replace my battery. Hold on one sec. Oh, I was hoping this didn't happen. There we go. And just a second here, a little technical difficulty. All right, there we go. And trying to get back to my train of thought. Yeah, so I would just like to take that model in other cities or states. But that friend of mine, his perspective on America, like it just kind of opened my mind. And so having a podcast like this where I can actually sit down and talk with people, even if I don't believe something, I think it's important for me to still listen and hear. I think when the divisiveness we see in America is coming from people not being willing to listen and understand and learn why that person may believe what they believe, but also understand that people culturally they're raised a certain way. People, and then you have certain parts of the country that just they lean certain directions, and then when people come out of that and they grow and they move out of the house, move out of the state, whatever, they get the exposure to the rest of the country and the world, they start to learn and grow their own ideas. And I think the most important part there is that we come to a consensus of how can we have a discussion. You know what I mean? Like, I'm pretty sure you and I, we believe different things, but we can still sit down and have a conversation. You know what I mean?
Yeah, the divisiveness to me is actually the biggest problem with the country. It's not who's in power or who's not in power or who's trying to be the president or who's not the president or what political ideology is controlling the Senate and which one isn't controlling the Senate and right. Left, red, blue. Like that to me is all immaterial. What is going to destroy this country is when we get to a point to where those two made up sides can't talk to each other. And that's where we're at. I mean, the visceral hatred that is being developed. And, and I don't like to get into conspiracies, but I just can't help
Sure.
but think that
I enjoy them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't have a specific conspiracy, but I will say that like that just, the way that the media has been able to divide the country along political lines and convince everybody that there actually is a political line and that their side is right and the other side is wrong, and that their side is more righteous and virtuous and loving and caring and the other side is evil, selfish, horrible, and what's been kind of interesting for me is I made a commitment that I was just totally going to disengage from political discussion on Facebook. I may leave a comment on somebody's if I can leave a bipartisan comment, but I'll never leave a right or left comment.
Okay.
And so because of that, I was raised in Arizona. So I was in Arizona for 20, 25 years, right? So I have tons of right-wing, political, religious, conservative type friends. But now I've been in LA for 5 years. So now I have tons of very liberal, very blue, Democrat type friends. And what's been interesting, because I haven't engaged, I'm still friends with everybody. And I see posts both sides. And it's almost comical to me because I have all of my Trump supporter friends. And by the way, really, really good, solid people who I love, people who I respect, people who are smart, intelligent, educated, compassionate, caring, artistic, loving human beings, like salt of the earth human beings. And they support Trump wholeheartedly. And, and they'll always put their asterisks. Yeah, I don't really agree with this, and I don't really like how he does this. And yeah, I don't really like him as a person. But because of these reasons, boom, 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 because of certain policies that he espouses that I agree with, he's my guy. And then I have people from Los Angeles, my actor friends, my comedy friends who are very left, very blue, very Democratic, who just hate the man and just think that he is Satan reincarnate, and that anybody who would vote for him might as well be Satan themselves. You know what I mean? And the venom and the vinegar that these posts, these people are posting on Facebook, and these are very loving people. Like, I know these friends of mine, you know what I mean? They're loving, compassionate, artistic people, and and they believe in dreams, and they want to help people, and they want to be inclusive, and they want to be loving towards people who are different and people who are ostracized, and the transgender movement, and they abhor racism, and they're such beautiful principles, and they have so much love until they talk about a Republican, and then just this hatred just spews out of them, and I'm like, you don't actually hate this. Like, you are not a hateful person, but the narrative has created this incentive to be like, no, that Republican person who votes for Trump is literally my enemy and I must hate them. And I'm going, well, I know you, friend on my left, and I know you, friend on my right. And I know that if we were hanging out, you would get along great. And you have so much more in common than what this political divisiveness has convinced you that you are. And that Trump person who you have decided to hate and to judge and to marginalize and to make assumptions about and to kind of paint with this broad stroke of like, well, anybody on the right, if you're on the right, then you must be bump, 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 bump. And then everybody on the right does the same thing. Well, if you're on the left, then you just must be bump, 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 bump. And it's this low definition, broad strokes, you're Tweedledee or you're Tweedledum, you're for me or you're against me, you're right or you're left, you're red or you're blue, and if you're not on my team, the only reason you're not on my team is because you're an idiot, you're unintelligent, you're uninformed, you're stupid, you're uncompassionate, you're evil, you're selfish, boom, 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 boom. And everybody's just throwing the same mud at each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I just kind of, and I'm just stepping back, and I'm just looking at this going, that is what the problem is.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree, because like I've seen that too, and I'll post things on my. I know you've probably seen it. I'll post something, and it'll get over 100 comments, and those comments are really just people going back and forth at each other. I'm thankful that I'm actually friends with people that are at least decent, so they'll reach out before they comment. Because my sister, she's just my sister Angie. I love her, love you, Angie. But she'll post links, and she'll be so defensive of Trump and saying he's not a racist, and blah blah blah. I'm like, okay, cool. But other people's opinions on whether that may or may not be true, that does matter, because I mean that they're a human being, that's their viewpoint, and so you are basically telling them that they're wrong. No, you're wrong. Blah blah. There's a billion reasons why he's not. And I'm like, I don't think you guys. And this brings me back to the point I made earlier, why it's really important to like get everybody on the same foundation of a conversation. Like, okay, so where are we coming from, right? Where's your basis of what defines a racist? I mean, that's actually a really good question. What defines a racist? And I was actually talking to people at the party last night about it. I didn't bring it up, but somebody had done it, and so I just kind of engaged a little bit more.
Yeah, that's a party topic. Hey, everybody, let's define
well,
racist.
There was people at different. Yeah, there was people at different. Well, it was actually a really good conversation. We were talking about like the pattern of what is recognized as racism, and there's things that people say, there's things that people do. And there's, it may be a group mentality or a single-minded individual, but it's also pattern recognition, right? So like if there's a pattern of behavior or something that you say or do, sometimes people don't know. And that's the thing. They may or may not know what they're saying could be construed as racist. But the problem too, though, is when people move the goalposts. So you have things that are a joke, and then you have inside jokes, and then you have, and I'm not like being like, oh, it's okay to do A or B or C or D. But the reality is, like, for example, me, I grew up with a lot of people of different colors, and we would just joke around with each other, and that was between us. But you take, and that's I would like attribute that to comedy. A lot of comics that have like comedy that if you were to take a joke they say, you cut that and you put it in quotes, like it's gonna look bad. It's gonna look really bad. But sure. It's meant to be a joke, whether it's a good joke or a bad joke. That depends on their intention. But the main point I'm getting at is where's people's frame of reference? Because if we're like, oh, this person's a racist because A, B, or C, or D, and I'm like, okay, cool. Then we got to continue with that. Otherwise, people can bring things out of left field, right field, and just add to a definition. And that was my point to my sister, Angie. I was like, hey, if they have an opinion about something, like that does matter. And you need to consider that, not saying that it's going to change your belief or where you come from and your stance, but you have to also understand that you're going to get to a point you're beating a dead horse. And it just it's not worth it. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter if like you agree or disagree. If you disagree, that's fine. But you also have to get to a point where, you can move along, like agree to disagree and just move on. And I think that's the problem where a lot of people don't do that. They don't agree to disagree and go, okay, well, that you may believe that, but I just disagree with you based on what I've looked into. And this is where this is what I've seen. And you exchange those ideas. And if the other person's not receptive, I'm like, all right, I can't change your mind, and that's fine. That's not really necessarily the goal. I just expressing I disagree. But like you had mentioned, people are throwing mud. People are being hateful and angry and those things where it gets into a different perspective of, are you trying to be accepted by a group because you want to identify as a certain side and you want that side to accept you? And so you have to condemn these things in the limelight so that people know that you're red or you're blue. Like, I don't know. Like, cause me, I don't identify either way. I have beliefs that are red, that are blue, and that are, like you had mentioned, libertarian. Like I love freedom. And I think people should, enact those freedoms. I really believe that people should have freedom of religion. I think that too. And I have a belief where I think if you're going to put people of different religious beliefs in a public forum, then you can't say that one religious group can have something and then another religious group cannot. That's where you get into a lot of issues. And the one thing when I got in a conversation with a friend of mine, I know I'm digressing, but I'll wrap up. But like when you have that, you have to have the equality of all religious beliefs to be able to do what they do. Otherwise, it's not necessarily an equal opportunity there. And like when the topic of like prayers in schools and stuff like that, and I'm like, well, I think prayer should be in schools if that's something that each religious belief does. But to say that it should be in schools only for Christians, that's not cool. What if Muslims, what if they want to be able to pray their seven times a day? What if they want to be able to do that? Like that should be allowed. I know that these regulations and things are changing in different states and different counties, blah, blah, blah. I don't know all that information, but I'm just stating like my belief is this. It's just a belief based on what I've seen, and I don't have a whole lot of information to back it up, but that's just what I believe. And so, then you continue to go down that road of, oh, this or that or blah, blah, blah. And well, then you get to a point where you're not having an argument. You're not having a discussion. You're having a yelling fest.
Yeah. If I could wave a magic wand, I would just say nobody's allowed to have a political discussion on Facebook. Which I know is now turning me into the very socialist dictator that I was condemning before. But I mean, because it's just so comical to me, because I see it all the time, which is, if you believe X, Y, and Z, go ahead and block me or unfriend me right now. Or if you say X, Y, and Z, I'm blocking you right now. So it's like, so what you're doing on your Facebook is you're blocking anybody who might have the audacity to have a different point of view. So what does that mean? Everybody on your Facebook it's like people are just creating their own echo chambers. And then so now since they've blocked everybody on their Facebook, now when they get to post, they can just post whatever they want and like, wow, look, everybody agrees with me. I must be right. The whole world agrees with me. It's like, no, the whole world in your max of 5,000 friends on Facebook, because you blocked everyone else who would have a differing opinion. And probably in your defense, whoever had a different opinion didn't express that opinion in a very respectful manner, because you posted something that was probably inflammatory. They took personal offense. And so then they started attacking you with that homonym arguments and going, well, you're just a dumb, stupid, blah, blah, blah. You haven't read this article. And what about blah, 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 blah. Well, you're just a mother, blocked. It's like, yay, democracy wins. Like it's just, and that's why I just, because that happened to me a couple times. And I just went, whatever this is, I will have nothing to do with it. And I have a couple dear friends, like I'll never block anybody for a political standpoint, but what I will do is if somebody is just spewing out their hatred, I will, because you can unfollow on Facebook, which means I'm still friends because I still want to communicate with them. I still want to talk to them, but their Facebook posts are unhealthy, and I know it's not who they really are, and that they're responding. Yeah. They're responding to the tribal nature within them. They're responding to the fear and the hatred, and they're responding to really, like, to my opinion, some of the worst parts of the human animal, which is tribalism, which is I have my tribe and the other tribes are enemies, and therefore I am justified in, like, they're not human beings. They're not individuals. I am justified in treating them like an enemy. And and that to me will lead us back to a civil war. I mean, we're already in an ideological civil war. And what happens when you don't talk to anybody? Well, then you have no other choice but to fight. It's like, if you can't talk, we might as well just
hash it out.
Just hash it out and start shooting until whoever happens to be the most powerful wins. But you don't change anybody's mind. The Civil War didn't change the South's mind. They're still bitter about it. You know what I mean? Like, they still don't. I mean, I say they. Now I'm guilty of the very thing that I'm talking about, but. The individuals who still are trying to push white supremacy.
Yeah, like the baby boomers that grew up in that environment.
Yeah, and they, their minds aren't changed. They still think it's okay to fly confetti. I'm saying I want to be careful. Individuals who still subscribe to the philosophies that the South was espousing, they haven't changed their mind. And we still have a KKK, we still have a white supremacist movement, and it's like, and what do? If we can't talk to them, and if they won't talk to us, or people who actually believe in equality and believe that people of all races should have equal opportunity, which it says in the Declaration of Independence, which is baffling to me that a document that says all human beings have inalienable rights to God could still allow slavery to happen. I just don't understand how that could happen, but it happened,
right.
there's still a thread of that ideology that still exists, and you don't get rid of it with guns. All you do is, you can kill people, but all that's going to do is, bolster the cause, and those who feel like, oh, well, you killed my dad, so now I'm against you. There was this really powerful documentary on Netflix, and the name is going to escape me, but it was this Muslim woman who actually went and talked to white supremacists. She's like, I just want to understand where they're coming from. KKK. I mean, we're talking hardcore racist white supremacist. I think they've changed their name. They don't call them the KKK anymore. White nationalists, maybe.
Something like that. Yeah, I don't know.
They've done some rebranding.
I don't follow them, so
try to soften their image.
Right.
But she would. We're talking hard. I mean, I hate the Jews. I hate black people. They're taking this country, and I mean, like what you would consider a stereotypical, kind of white nationalist. And she would just have a conversation with them. She'd just sit down. Well, tell me more, and then, and there was this one guy who was talking to me. He was literally throwing around, like, he would go just throw like into Jewish neighborhoods and just throw pamphlets, just hate crimes. I guess I don't know if they would consider a crime because he wasn't physically harming him, but I mean that's still evil. In my opinion, that's an evil thing to do, to just hate somebody because they're Jewish, right? But he would go throw pamphlets or whatever, like in these neighborhoods or whatever, and she was talking to him, and she goes like, well, I'm a Muslim, do you hate me? And he goes, well, I consider you a friend, so you've definitely changed my opinion of Muslims, but I'd never break bread with a Jew. Like he couldn't quite get there, but he was able to, like, oh, this Muslim woman is talking to me, and he considered her a friend, And one of the most powerful moments of the documentary, I almost cried when I watched it, was one of the people she was talking to was, he was like head of the marketing department for the white nationalist movement, and she was having a conversation with him, and like at the very end of the documentary, that guy calls her and says, hey, I just want you to know that after having my discussion with you, I've renounced my position. I learned that what I'm doing is wrong. And it's like, that's how you change a mind. You know what I mean? Like that guy, because she just went and talked to him as a human being, help me understand your point of view. Why do you feel this way? Like, if you just talk to them and let them express, like, truth is going to come out. What doesn't work is, how dare you? I hate you. Because that just feeds what they've been saying all along. Haha, I knew it. Like,
no, the gotcha.
White people, and we are under attack, and we do, and then it's fear, and it's hatred, and it's walls, and it's boundaries, and it's tribalism. But like, you just go to talk to people, and that's just all I want to do. Like, I don't care if you're on the left. I don't care if you're on the right. I don't care if you vote for Trump. I don't care if you vote for Biden. I don't care if you're pro-life. I don't care if you're pro-choice. I don't care if you're pro-gun. I don't care if you're anti-gun. I can have a conversation with anybody with any point of view, and I can get to their humanity and understand them and empathize and understand their point of view. And that, to me, is the only way this country is going to survive. And as long as it's, red jerseys versus blue jerseys, it's always going to be a battle. It's always going to be a
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to people before about how I think, like, the two-party system needs to go, because if you think about it, and one thing I was going to mention earlier, but we went into a lot of different directions, that, for example, the stimulus package, right? So I think the way they went about that was wrong. I think there's a lot of people that were, they run a lot of companies. These are billionaires. So Mark Cuban mentioned it. A lot of other people mentioned it. The guy that was running to be the Democratic president nominee, Andrew Yang, talked about universal basic income. But his reasoning for it was because we're moving in a direction in our society that we'll get to a point where it's going to demand, it's going to be necessary. Now, when I say, you talked about, you don't want to you don't want to depend on the government for your income, but there's also a thing where there's a transaction actually happening because we live in a society now where we're exchanging our data for a free social platform. There's a transaction there. Like, if I like things, if I'm doing certain things, it's teaching an algorithm, right? Which means advertisers can advertise to me certain products. And when I started learning about advertising and social media and how you do stuff on Facebook ads, stuff like that, I was like, oh man, these ads are bad. But when I started seeing products that I would actually love to buy, but I know I can't buy them right now, I started really interacting with these ads. And there's this health ring that will monitor your sleep, similar to the watch, but I don't want to wear the watch to bed. I do now until I can get the ring, till I can get like a better measurement of my sleep. But I really would like to get that and try it out. And so I just keep interacting with the ad and blah, 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 and it showed me. But that interaction, like that data, that transaction, if you will, bartering, if you can think of it that way, like that helps me continue to see that thing. And the advertising companies eventually, or the company advertising for that product, they're eventually going to get a customer because I will eventually buy that product. And so when Andrew Yang talks about the universal basic income, we're just taking a percentage of the Facebook ad or Google search or whatever the case is, feeding this company billions of dollars. And we're saying, hey, like, you're not paying tons in certain types of taxes. So why don't we just go ahead and change that? Because in reality, like, this society is just moving, it's changing vastly, and a lot of stuff is happening on the internet. We have a lot of cloud services now. There's not a whole lot being printed anymore. Faxing from an IT perspective is a dying medium, and it's not even that secure if you think about it, because the way that people can just like hack into phone lines now, it's a joke. And so from a security standpoint, that's a problem. And so from that perspective, I think, going back to the stimulus package, they should have done something that was a monthly thing, not a single check, because there's so many people that are not in industries, and you talked about a couple of them, that are not essential. So what does that mean? That means they're out of work. Businesses are closing. That's not going to be an effect we're going to feel just till next year. We're going to feel that 10 years from now, because there's going to be a lot of stores, a lot of areas of communities that are gone. And there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to feel down the road. And I felt that if there was something monthly, that would have been different until the pandemic was gone. And rather that it was, we had moved forward and gotten into a better understanding of the virus, and we could handle it with the vaccine, whatever, and open up the country. And these politicians, going back to, reason why I brought that up, they literally can have this discourse of, I want this and this person wants this, and it's like, it's not about what y'all want, it's about what the people need. So it doesn't matter if it's a monthly, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, there's people out of work to no fault of their own. So that in my opinion, that's where I feel like, our taxes kind of pay to help us out in times where the whole country's in a stink like we're in now. And like, the way that they're able to just go, well, we can't come to an agreement. Sorry, we're going to go on break for a month and we'll try again later. Oh, so sorry. It's an election year. I know this is bad timing, but we're going to wait until after the election until we come up with an agreement for a stimulus. That, I feel like, is the most disgusting thing about politics, about what's going on right now, the bipartisanship. That's why I feel like it needs to go. Because when you're not focusing on what the people need, regardless of what people believe, everybody knows that, hey, we need food on the table, we need to pay our rent, and that's pretty much it. Until we can figure out a way to get these businesses back up so people can go back to work. And I just think, like, the way they've handled it, it's just been terrible. What have you seen?
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, but it comes back to my original point, which is the first problem was the government tried to save everybody in the first place, instead of just saying, hey, here's a virus. Everybody needs to take responsibility for your own health and be aware. This is what we know about it. this is some certain precautions. It seems to be diminished if you wear a mask. If you're afraid of getting it, then don't leave. If you want to be cautious, then wear a mask. If you don't care, good luck, but there is a virus out there and you could die. Well, what about the hospitals or whatever? Well, if the hospitals get full, then we'll let you know, which now the risk is there's a virus out there, you could catch it, and there's no hospital bed, so you might have to die in your car in a parking lot. But that's your risk. You know what I mean? Like, you get to choose that risk. So yeah, and the two-party system, it's funny because speaking of not posting on Facebook posts, I did actually comment on a friend of mine's post because it was bipartisan, and that was my whole point. I was like, the two-party system is non-constitutional. Nowhere in the Constitution or in the Bill of Rights or in the Declaration of Independence does it say, and wherefore there shall be two political parties which control and monopolize the entire political system from the smallest government entity to the highest office in the land, and there should be two sides, and they should fight back and forth. Like, that's not anywhere. The two-party system is arbitrary. It's made up. Yeah. It doesn't really exist, yet.
Yeah.
I mean, why? Why on an election does it say Republican, Democrat? Why is there a party designation? Why do we look at the Senate and say, well, the Republicans rule half of this, this half and this much? I'm like, why does that even exist? It's nowhere that's how it's supposed to be. We created that system independent of any constitution or the Declaration of Independence, and it's just because of money. It's because the two parties have the money, and they make sure that they have the money, and they go get the businesses on their side to give them the money so that they can go win and can go control the government. It has nothing to do with what's in the best interest of the people. It has to do what's in the best interest of power and money to the parties. And I was like, what how about this? What if it was illegal to designate a party when you ran for office? Hi, I'm Paul Green, and I'm running for mayor. Here's how I think I can do best. Hey, I'm another person. I want to run for the mayor. Here's why I think I'd be best for the job. What party are you? Oh, we're not allowed to tell you what party we're with. We're not with the party. Hey, who controls the Senate? What do you mean? Well, what party? There is no party designation. It's just the Senate.
Yeah. It's
just the Congress. Well, you know what I mean? Like, we can't even fathom it, like.
It definitely is. I mean, this is another reason why I really enjoy doing this kind of thing, because now we're getting into stuff that's like really thought-provoking. And what if we had no party system and we just had people that they were just voted into office, and they either did a good job or they didn't, and that's it. Yeah. And they didn't do a good job, you voted them out. I mean, because that goes into like when you have people who I'm not saying that politics can't be your career, but I do believe you shouldn't be in the same job for 40 years because you don't know what's going on with an iPad, and you don't even know what an iPad is. And you know how to access the internet or use it or check email. Like, you need to go because you can't be having hearings with somebody who, helped invent Facebook or invented Facebook and try to ask them questions and even if you didn't know, like, these people had enough time, they could have consulted experts and got some more information and had good questions to ask despite them really understanding it or even the answer that was given, because then they can go back and consult the experts. But they weren't smart enough to do that. It was really comical to listen to these hearings with the one with just Mark Zuckerberg. But then again, they did it recently. I watched the whole 5-hour thing, and it was hilarious. These people, they did actually ask some pretty good questions, but still, I just felt like, they really need to have people in Congress, the Senate, that are able to ask questions that are appropriate to the people whom they are interviewing or questioning. Otherwise, you're not going to get the information. They're going to spew political crap regardless, but at least they're being asked questions that if they can answer them, they will. And they can give an answer that's going to at least speak to the question that was asked instead of trying to politically spin something because the politicians have no clue what they're doing. Right. So in that regard, I think, and it goes into another area where I was talking to a couple of friends. I don't know if it was last night or actually it was in the last podcast I did with the first guy that I talked to from Germany, my buddy Martin. He and I discussed panels of experts. Like, for example, what I don't understand now, I'm not saying that I know a lot of things that I get into, people think that it's going one way and you're like, oh, you're for communism. I'm like, no, that's not it. It's just I'm a programmer. I develop Android apps and just programming in general. Like I've started diving into some web development. But when you do that, you have, and I've actually taken courses. I was going to get a degree in network systems administration. And basically what that means is that I would be the administrator who is building the projects and proposals and things like that for a network build, right? So that means proposals, that means writing documents, that means talking to the decision makers. And so I understand those things. And when you go into programming, if you do anything more than once, you have to have a variable for that so that it can be accessed in multiple places. You don't just do something over and over again at the same time or just doing the exact same thing because that's not good code. And so when you get into the federal versus state, and again, you have a lot more knowledge on the, independence, those documents than I do, like the Bill of Rights and stuff like that. I haven't actually read them. I probably should get them now. But for example, plumbing, in-house, you have electrical wiring. My wife's an electrician for the B-52s. And so I've learned a little bit about that, and I've done wiring myself for the network cabling and stuff like that. And like there's different standards in every state. I don't understand why that is, but there is. That doesn't make sense to me. I know there's geographical differences, but I don't understand that. So why can't there be a panel for electricians? So you have master electricians that they reach the peak of their career and like, all right, I'm going to retire and I'm just going to be on a panel of, for the state of Washington. I'm going to be on the panel for electricians so we can make sure that we're keeping standards in this state that are equal with all the other states. And the other reason why I bring that up too is because when you go to a different state that has different standards you want to build, it's always different. And I'm coming from a perspective of, I helped a pastor of mine in Dallas when we were going to a different church. I helped them build the church. And he helped me learn that he would build churches in other counties without a problem. Like there wouldn't ever be the amount of red tape that he experienced when he built in a specific place in Dallas. And that's crazy. But that also means that there should not be different laws or regulations or whatever, just because some random person wants to make it because they want to have power. Like that doesn't make any sense. And so that goes to plumbing, that goes to all these other types of industries. There needs to be standardization across the country. It's similar to how there's like Second Amendment. There's gun laws in different states that don't make sense. Like you have Chicago, the most amount of people that are dying by guns, but they have the most amount of gun laws, and they're not working. Like it doesn't matter which aisle you're on or which side of the aisle you're on, they're not working versus other places that have lesser gun laws and there's lesser deaths because people they carry. You know what I mean? So I don't know. When I think of that stuff, I think that it would be more important to have that kind of society. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of like, oh, we're gonna elect a politician, and then they're going to be intimate experts on every single aspect of society. It's like, well, they're going to be an expert in healthcare, they're going to be an expert in law, they're going to be an expert in law enforcement,
right.
They're going to be an expert in building codes. They're going to be an expert in mental health. They're going to be an expert in hospitals. They're going to be an expert in prisons. They're going to be an experts in building codes and construction codes, in water supply, in providing electricity. They're going to be an expert in disaster relief. They're going to be an expert in disease outbreak. It's like nobody is that. Yet we hire a politician. It's like, here's every conceivable possible problem in the human, that a human can deal with, solve all of them. go. It's just not practical, you know? And it's like, and that's my whole thing is like, yeah, getting away from the two-party system and and plus then you have this political ideology, which is my party has the best strategies for solving all of the world's problems. So it's like, oh, if you want to solve healthcare, you either need to solve it how the left thinks it should be solved, or B, you need to solve it how the right thinks it should be solved. And I'm like,
right.
How about neither of those? How about you get a committee of doctors, administrators, insurance, and patients, and you set up committees in every single state, and you have those committees get together and say, what's actually best? How can we all win? What does everybody want? Good quality healthcare, available healthcare, affordable healthcare. And what do doctors want? They want the ability to be doctors and to issue whatever treatments they think are best, and they want to be able to be rich. What do insurance companies want? Insurance companies want to be wealthy, right? So it's like, how can everybody be happy? And it's not going to be by going all privatized or all socialized. And I don't know what the answer is because I'm not an expert.
Yeah, no, I don't think anybody has the exact answer.
To be. And I don't think that because I vote for my political ideology, it's like, oh, healthcare is free, problem solved. It's like, no, it's not. Well, it worked in Scandinavia, but it's like, debatable. Well, what about all privatized? I don't know. Maybe. It's like, I don't have the answer to those problems. And as long as we have a right or left, and it's not a matter of solving the problem, it's a matter of my political ideology needs to solve the problem. It just keeps getting worse. Like, it's not working, and yet we just keep doubling down. It's that there's a fallacy about that. I don't know what it's called. I'm going to make it up. It's like a sunk cost fallacy. It's like, well, I've invested so much of my energy believing in my political ideology that if I try to abandon it now, then I've wasted all of that time. And it's like, well, we've invested our entire political system into this two-party system, so we got to make it work. We can't abandon it and try something else. It's like, it's not working, and all measurements are showing that it's getting worse. Like, the elections are getting worse. They're getting more visceral. Yeah. We're getting fewer candidates that people can even tolerate, and like even people who like I know are going to vote for Biden, who I know are going to vote for Trump. I'll also hear them say like, this is the worst decision I've ever had to make to vote for this guy. Like, they don't even like who their parties have floated to the top.
Right.
Well, what other choice do we have? There's no such thing as a third option in this country. You get two choices. It's like, where did that come from? And then that bleeds down to everything. That bleeds down to healthcare, and that bleeds down to prison reform, and that bleeds down to, drugs, and, disaster relief, and, and taxes, and small businesses, and boom, boom, boom. And it's like all of and it's like, as long as it's two sides fighting, to me, nobody wins. As long as nobody wins, nothing gets better. The only way we'll ever get better is we get rid of the two sides, and we just say, here are the problems. How can we solve it? The problem right now is healthcare is getting more and more expensive. It's less and less accessible. More and more people can't afford it. The doctors are are having a harder and harder time being able just to take care of their patients the way that they want to, because they're subject to the insurance companies. The insurance companies are frustrated because they're getting drastically fraudulated because doctors will just, to get money from anybody, because doctors have to work for free so much. It's like, well, this person has insurance, so we'll just tack on all of these tests to try to make some money here, because by law, we have to do our job for free for anybody who comes into the emergency room, even if they can't pay or, whatever pay. It's like, and then like nobody's happy. It's not working. New system. But it's like, no. It's gotta be. It's got to be socialized. It's all got to be free. Then problem solved. No. It's got to be privatized. Then problem solved. Is like, no, that's your political ideology. I don't know what the best system is because I don't understand the nuances of healthcare. Why would I think that if I vote for right or left, that I've solved the problem? Like, yep, I voted for, my guy on the left. That means free healthcare, problem solved. It's like, no, it's not going to solve the problem. It's not, like.
Yeah.
So yeah,
One thing I can speak.
I'm all about that.
One thing I can say on that is I was going to mention on that committee. I think there should also be people from an IT infrastructure background, or just IT in general, like IT experts,
Sure.
people that have been in the industry at least on the committee level. I'm a firm believer that it's garbage that companies will have like a position posted and you have to have like 5 years of experience, but it's an entry level job. But it's like, how do I get 5 years of experience on an entry level job? That
Right.
stuff doesn't make any sense. But like for a committee, I really think that because what they'll do, I did IT for the Veteran Affairs, right? And what I learned was one of the major reasons that there's problems with. Now, obviously, I had a clearance, so I can't speak to a lot of the particulars, but it's not even necessary. To explain what I'm about to say is a lot of the problems that you see where they're like, oh, doctors can't care for their the veterans and they're waiting a long time. Well, I can tell you a lot of those reasons have to do with technical problems, has to do with the fact that like when they are calling in for help, I don't have the power to help them from start to finish. Like that has been the major issue. And then you get, because we're supposed to be verbatim every step. So we have this knowledge article. We have to go by the knowledge article step by step. We can't deviate. And we also don't have administrative privileges, right? So at my job that I'm at now, I have administrative privileges. So that means I can go in, I can do what's necessary. However, there's sometimes I encounter a farm because I work as a hardware support technician for pharmacy software, independent pharmacy software. So independent pharmacies, they get the software and that's what they use to fill prescriptions and stuff like that. And so they either don't have somebody who manages their IT or they do. And so I encounter both scenarios. But either way, we have to have that administrative access to just do what we got to do. Otherwise, we can't do anything. But those situations are very rare. But when I was working with the Veterans Affairs and doing their IT work, it was a contract. So I wasn't working directly with the government. I was in a company that was contracted. And the problems that we saw were just bureaucracy. It was just that. It was these people were literally getting. I would sometimes talk to the same people, which is very rare when you have like over 400 agents that are doing the same thing I was doing. So getting the same person was crazy. But I would, and they'd be like, "Yeah, I've been getting this runaround all on, and I'm literally just trying to do my job." And so you compound that by however many hundreds of thousands. When I did research, I saw that we serve 300,000 people across the country, which is, the number is probably a lot larger than that because you have to count like the people that are contracted to the actual hospitals. And so it's a lot of people. So when they're bogged down by just trying to get their computer systems they need to do their job, then that's where a lot of the problems arise. So you have people that are incompetent, right? But then you also have issues where the people that are in charge, they are at a level where they care about their bonuses or whatever the case is. They're in a political position, back to what you were saying, and so they're not trying to do what they need to actually get stuff to work efficiently. They only care about doing what they can to bolster whatever they're trying to do in their political career to move on to the next thing. And that's where the problem lies. They're not actually trying to help. And so in addition to that, you have people who they get a job and they use a computer every day and they're not required to know how to use it. I'm not saying they got to learn how to program it. I'm just saying, from my perspective, these people like, where's the start button? It's down there to your left. You should probably know that.
Sure.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, that's kind of where I'm at on that. Is like everywhere we're at now, and no matter where you go in the industry, any government agency, they all use computers. They all have backbones, and so that's kind of where I was getting at. Like, I think having those kind of experts in any industry, obviously, like we mentioned, that's what I think would be helpful, regardless of whether we keep the two-party system or not. I mean, hopefully, eventually we can get away with it, but yeah, I really think that would help because then you have people who know what they're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, it's a no-brainer. If you want a problem solved, give it to the person who knows the most about it, and that's just not really how it works, you know. And there's just, it seems like there's just so many problems in our country that are just so like probably do have just like a couple tweaks, like if we just did it this way, or if we just did it this way, or if we just got rid of this regulation, it's like, it would just be so much better. But but everybody is just too busy. Again, I'm generalizing, but it just feels like everybody's too busy fighting and trying to win, to where it's like, well, instead of all of that energy, all of that money that is used to try to win, what if all of that energy and all that money was used to solve a problem together? Like, I mean, I know this is idealistic, but it's like, what if every campaign dollar, instead of going to try to get Trump to win or trying to get Biden to win or any of the right or left senator, I mean, all the way down the line, what if all that money was put into an account and it was like, all right, this money is now going to go to hiring a committee of the healthcare committee, and we're going to bring in like the top analysts, the top business minds, the top healthcare minds, the top administrative minds, the top insurance minds, and we're going to bring in like a representation of patients who have had horrible experiences, you know what I mean, and we're going to do that thing, what's it called, listen, and go like, wow, this is the doctor's experience. This is the patient's experience. This was the insurance experience. This was the administration's experience. How could all of this have been better? It's like any company who's successful, that's what you have to do. Otherwise, you're out of business. But because these are voiced by the system and by the government, just nothing changes. It just keeps on sucking and keeps on getting worse and worse and worse. And the incentive is right. It's like, well, where's the incentive? Well, the incentive is in winning. That's where all the money is going. That's where all the energy is going. All the energy is going to the fight. It's not going to solving the problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many problems that I think, like you mentioned, if they just focused on like just actually devoting resources to actual issues instead of making it a political point, because that's what I feel like. I feel like it's just a political point. Like they're not worried about solving a problem. It's just the only time solutions happen or things are changed in the government is if there's a political point to gain. And if there's a political point to gain, they're gonna go after it, or they're gonna keep continuing to go after it just because their base. It makes sense for them to continually, like, I don't mean to call them a parrot, but they just keep saying the same stuff over and over again, and they're not actually doing what's necessary to make change happen.
Sure. Well, why would they? It's like that. There's no incentive to. It's like Obamacare versus, Trump doesn't really have a plan, but it's like, when Obamacare was coming out, what if that was the best? What if that was a really good plan? Nobody on the right would allow themselves to see it. Or it's like, okay, well, here's the Obama plan. How can we improve upon this? How can we test it? Cool. There's a plan, like that's a start, let's, but no, it turned into Obamacare is the greatest thing ever, or Obamacare is going to ruin everything. You know what I mean? And it's like, then Trump comes in, and of course he gets rid of Obamacare, and what does he replace it with? Well, nothing really. Well, what's your plan? Well, we don't know. You know what I mean? It's like, that's not a plan, Again, I keep referring to Hamilton because there's so many fun nuggets in there, but it's like when Hamilton was talking about his financial plan, and he's like, well, if they don't have a plan, they just hate mine, It's like, what if instead of fighting, we just forgave our brother, whatever, and just went to the kitchen table and it's like, all right, so here's your plan. Cool. How can we test that? How can we make it better? But the other thing is like these plans are, the government bills and stuff like that. They're just so hairy and so large. And like, that's just not how you're successful. It's like, let's implement a plan. Let's test it and improve upon it. I mean, that's what every successful company does. We're going to put it out there. We're going to get feedback. We're going to test it, and we're going to improve. So it's like, all right, what's the minimal viable thing that we can do to like make healthcare better? All right, what's the plan? Okay, right. So how can we make? It's like we want three things. We want it affordable, we want it accessible, and we want good doctors, right? All three of those need to win. So what's not working? Well, premiums are way too expensive. Doctors are not incentivized to make money. And, and there's a lot of bad quality out there. So it's like, it's a plan.
Or the price is not just the premiums, but the prices for things are just way too inflated.
Or just the cost.
Like you buy an MRI, you buy an MRI machine, and let's say it costs $250,000. Okay, so that's the cost of it. But like when you get to the point where it's paid off, what then? Like, is there a price for when it's trying to pay it off? And then is there a price for afterwards? Or is that just the same price? Because then it's just, okay, well, now this is way too much. Like it's not necessary to charge, I don't know, $5,000 for something that,
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I know eventually we'll get to the point to where I've seen TV shows where all they have was they lay you on this bed and the scanner comes over you and all of a sudden they can see everything. Like when we get to the day where that's a thing, that's going to be great. I'm sure it's going to cost a lot of money, but I don't know. I mean, I agree with you. And I think all those things are good points, good topics and things that people they need to continue to discuss. And like we had, you have different beliefs and I have different beliefs, but we were able to still have a good conversation. I think that's the problem. I think people need to learn how to do that. And I was actually going to mention a point a while ago, but we kind of went to different points. But to your discussion about, and we can wrap up on this, is you ever heard of Daryl Davis?
I don't believe so.
So you watched the documentary on the Muslim that talked to a KKK guy. But Daryl Davis actually converted 200 KKK members just by simply having a conversation. He did the exact same thing the Muslim lady did. And he didn't go with an intention of doing it. From what I remember, because he was on a Joe Rogan podcast and he explained it. And he said, I just tried to understand. I was trying to understand because I think he was a musician. He was playing music, and there was somebody in the crowd that was a KK member, and they were like, "Oh, I really like your music," or something like that. I can't remember the details, are fuzzy, but basically the point is, So I got the highlights here. He's like, I was playing music. It was my first time playing in this particular bar called the Silver Dollar Lounge, and this white gentleman approached me, and he says, "I really enjoy you all's music," and he thanked him, blah blah. And he's like, "But this is the first time I've ever heard a black man play piano like Jerry Lee Lewis." And then he goes and says, "Well, where do you think Jerry Lee Lewis learned how to play that kind of style?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know." And he goes on to say, "Well, that's what the kind of rockabilly or rock and roll style came from." And then he didn't understand that. He's like, "Oh, this sounds great." He's like, "Yeah, Jerry Lee Lewis learned that from a black guy."
Right.
And so it was crazy. And so he goes on to all these different stories when I watched him on the Joe Rogan podcast, and he talks about how he would just have conversations. He would sit down with people and he would just befriend them. And then they did the same thing that guy did in that documentary, where he decided to because he realized what he was doing was wrong. But it brings me back to the point where I think, and if I could do anything with this podcast, I mean, I would love to even have like a KKK member on here so I can talk to them and understand. But I think that's the problem with America is people are just, that's that tribalism where they have no conception, no idea of what they're doing is wrong, or that there's, that they're coming from a place of hatefulness and anger, and they're trying to put that across on someone else. But to other people around them in their circle, they're super nice and all that kind of stuff. Like you had mentioned some of your friends, super nice people, super, beautiful individuals, but they're just spewing this mud, this hate and anger. And I think that's what we really need to do. We need to sit down and get to a point where we can all come together and be open, not closed-minded, open-minded to different perspectives and ideas, but not so they can be argued, but just so people can understand. Right. Betty White said it perfect I can't remember the quote, but she was, and then, I don't even know if she made the quote up, but she said it doesn't, like, you shouldn't care what people do in their own home. Like, who cares? And that's kind of the big thing is like who cares what people do in their own home? Who cares what building they go into to worship the spaghetti monster they believe in? And it just doesn't matter. It has no bearing on my life. The only thing that matters is if, okay, so the way I live my life, the only time you should care is if, like, okay, if people are impressioning their beliefs onto, say, my kids, and I'm like, I don't believe that, and I don't want that, or they're in an environment where it's supposed to be a public area, like a school, public school, or something like that, and you have like certain religious things being brought in there, and now your kid's in a position where they're exposed to something that you may or may not want, or something like that. I'm not speaking of like a religious class, that's different, but you know what I'm saying. And so, but like, I think that, like, if people were to just understand, other people's perspectives, like learning about my buddy who lived in Bulgaria and almost died, potentially could have died if that missile had, was 20 miles another direction. And his perspective of the United States military is garbage. I mean, that's a good thing for me to know, because it keeps my perspective of the military in check. And my wife's in the Air Force. And so, it's I don't know. I think that's what people need more of. People need more perspective of other people's view of life.
Yeah, I agree. So
cool.
That's just kind of where I'm at. I actually, me and a colleague, we actually started a podcast called The Bridge. It ended up just not being something that, we really had the time to put the energy behind. But that was the whole concept. We just were like, we're sick of the left, we're sick of the right. And I just want people to talk to each other. More importantly, those who do disagree, and create an environment where they can be vulnerable, honest, and empathetic, and understand the other point of view. You don't got to convert anybody. You don't got to change any minds, but just have a conversation. And
right.
All right, let's get somebody who wants gun control, and let's get somebody who wants less gun control. Let's talk. Guess what? Neither of you want more school children getting shot to death. Neither of you want
exactly.
that. You actually agree on that. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. So you're not, like, the gun control person isn't some horrible communist trying to, take your, like, that's not where they're coming from. And the person who wants to have, the freedom to own a gun isn't some heartless, careless, person who, delights every time a school shooting happens. It's like, no, we have a tendency to villainize, exaggerate. And, we exaggerate our own virtue, and we exaggerate, the assumed villainy of anybody else who has the audacity to think differently than us. And yeah, and I just have no place in me for that. I just, and people who I love and care for, if that's where they're at, and they're in a point to where they just have to express their point of view in that sort of vitriol, I'm like, I just love them anyway, but I just won't engage, and I'll just stop following them, because that's just not the energy that I need, and I just don't think that's helpful, and it's just not anything that is of interest to me to engage in. But anybody who wants to talk about unity, anybody who wants to talk about coming together, anybody who wants to have an open dialogue, or have a discussion, all day long, I'm all about that. Anybody who wants to understand, anybody who wants to have compassion or empathy, all about it, all day long. I'll listen to anybody who and have a discussion with anybody who wants to have a conversation. But I'm not going to engage in politics. I'm not going to engage in right versus left. I'm not going to engage in with venom. I'll have a discussion. I'll talk to you if you're hardcore left and you want to tell me why. I'm glad to listen. But if the only thing that you can express is how wrong the other side is and how evil the other, well, that I'm not interested in. But I'm definitely willing to listen and empathize. So
yeah, for sure. And I think that's definitely something, a really good note to leave off on. But Paul, I mean, it's been really great chatting with you, and I actually learned a lot in regards to like the comedy side of things, about, because I didn't know the improv versus the stand up and just, understanding how that works. And then also like the acting side, like, the different industry things that you had mentioned. But anyways, man, it was really great talking to you. I learned a lot. And then we obviously ended on a lot of cool things about the country and all this other stuff that's going on, which is, again, one of the main points of why I wanted to start the Frank Experience, just to really have a conversation with people and exactly what we're doing. I mean, I know this probably isn't going to be the case with every conversation, but I still want to have that dialogue. And obviously, the day may come where I have somebody on and I think it may go one direction and it might go the other way. And who knows? But I mean, I still want to be open and honest and at least help people understand, like, hey, if I don't believe that, that's cool. I don't believe it. But I mean, it's cool that you may believe something different, but that's okay. And that's the point of being an American, is that's okay. And I think also it's actually okay in other countries too. And I think that's the problem that Americans have, is they have this belief where, only Americans can believe whatever they want. Other countries, they can't have any other beliefs, but that's not true. They all want the same things as we do. Like that's what I got from my buddy who's from Bulgaria but lives in Germany, is they just want the same stuff. They love the same things. They want to have a good life, a wife, family, provide for their family, maybe own a business, whatever. They all want the same stuff.
Yeah, totally.
So anyways, man, it was great talking to you. And yeah, definitely, man. We'll see you guys later.
Take care.
Let me stop the recording.